because it was like, hey, time is something that we've always tried to control, always something that we want to hold and grasp, but the tighter we try to get onto it, it just flows right through. It is becoming more fleeting the more we try to control time.
Welcome to my channel.
Okay, here are 3 paintings out of my 2026 art collection. These are all watercolor on panel board, but of course they have some differences. I want to talk to you about the process of these paintings, what they mean, the story behind them, and how do they fit into my overall 2026 art collection. So these two look similar, but this one doesn't really match. And the reason why this one exists, because my first go at this painting failed miserably and I had to start completely over. And so to make the most of my time while I was ready to paint, I went ahead and did this one. So let's talk materials and process. All 3 of these are watercolor on panel board. These 2, however, are on a panel that came with gesso. And then I applied my own clayboard recipe on top of that. This one right behind me is watercolor on the aqua board by Da Vinci. This is a completely different feel, even though it is kind of like clayboard, but these 2 are from a homemade recipe that I have. Both of these took a lot of time because there were a lot of dots to paint. I did this by tapping the back of my brush into some watercolor and then tapping it onto the clayboard. The really cool thing about clayboard is that its absorbency is very different than paper. It's going to hold the water on the surface for longer and will create more beautiful blooms and textures, and that's why I'm able to have all these really cool textures on my paintings, and I can really only get that through clayboard. I had to do the dots in multiple layers because I didn't want the watercolor to bleed together, so this required a little bit at a time. And once I was done with the watercolor dots, I then moved on to applying a 3D watercolor ground by Core. This is a super cool material that I have recently discovered, and I just simply combined it with my watercolor from the tube, mixed it together into a beautiful paste, and then applied the dots with a palette knife on top of my other dots. So really you can't tell digitally, but up close you can see the different layers of the watercolor dots that were done on the clayboard itself with the back of my brush, and then the watercolor dots that were done with the 3D core with the palette knife. So they have a really cool texture to them, and because clayboard is also so smooth and flat, it is a high contrast to the rest of the painting. I am so pleased with how these turned out in their concepts and just the overall textures that they produced that I am really wanting to expound on these ideas even further. I want to try different hands, different colored dots, different like mountains and different sceneries. I am so pumped to just kind of continue this concept. So when you're working on a collection, it's a really good idea to kind of start with some mock-ups or at least some smaller paintings to experiment with your ideas. So before this one came about, I experimented with my idea through this one. This one, however, is not the same surface, and it's just gesso on a panel board. I really wanted to try having a really smooth surface with the 3D ground on top, and so I still applied some of the dots on here and realized, oh, this is super cool, but needs some more development. Now, this one didn't necessarily have a mock-up, but I did have a painting that inspired it. This painting right here was a little experiment in my first go on Aqua Board by Da Vinci. Because this one is kind of unique in its absorbency, that's a little different than my clayboard recipe, it absorbs the color a lot faster and the colors seem to be a little bit more richer. I decided I was going to use my aqua board that I had and make a painting out of it with this inspiration. So I went ahead and I took one of my sketches that I already had, quickly fleshed out the idea, and then we produced this one. It's called Overwhelmed. It's the idea of that we have a lot going on in our lives and it just feels like it's suffocating us and reaching and we're trying to get out, but it's all following with us. The cool thing about all 3 of these is that I used gravity to help me paint my textures. With the water drips that's going on, whether they go up or down, and some of the streaking, definitely I just tilted the whole panel and used gravity to my advantage, carrying that water all the way down. And because it's on clayboard, it has this way joy of just wiping through the color and bringing everything with it. A little backstory about this one on why it failed. So I had a clayboard recipe that I had stored in the fridge about the same time that I made this one, but it was at least 2 months before I got to this one because I didn't do these paintings back to back. By the time I got to this one, my recipe had actually expired. I later found out through just researching online that rabbit skin glue in particular has an expiration date of like 2 weeks. So I was way over the limit there, and it completely was just not holding up. So as soon as I kept putting water down, it was disintegrating. I was not aware that there was an expiration date to the recipe, so I kind of just thought that the clayboard was not curing properly. So of course, I just gave it more time. Thankfully, I got to the conclusion rather quickly on like, hey, I need to start over. The clayboard was so unstable that all I had to do was wash it off. I didn't even have to sand it. All I had to do was take my clayboard with a wet rag and just wipe it, and then it was gone. There was no way I would have been able to do a painting on top of that. Thankfully though, this one held up. I redid the recipe, started from scratch again, and it looks great. Okay, so let's talk about the concepts of these two paintings. These are both called time. The sand or the dots, whatever they are, some people even say they look like candy, which I think is so fun. But both of these hands with their piles represent time. I kind of wanted to look at time in a way that wasn't so negative and I guess you could say like historic to painting concepts through like an hourglass or a skull or rotting fruit. There's just aspects of it that can seem really dark. If you're showing some kind of decay, it's a definite representation of time and the inevitability of just life itself coming to an end. I was kind of inspired by Inside Out, this Pixar movie that I love so much, and how time in some ways was represented by those marbles that were more like memories or moments, and really it is a capsule of time. So with these dots, I was just like thinking through, oh, each color is an emotion, each moment is its own, but yet collectively they are a pillar of time. And on top of that inspiration that was just so fun, I was reading through a book called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. That book was fantastic. I've read a lot of time management books and most of them get really annoying and strategic and just like too much, but this one was flipping it all on its head. So it was really refreshing to read that while painting these because it was like, hey, time is something that we've always tried to control, always something that we want to hold and grasp, but the tighter we try to get onto it, it just flows right through. It is becoming more fleeting the more we try to control time. The more you just sit in that, the more you can actually take a moment to embrace and enjoy time. And as far as it goes with one hand versus two hands, there's not really a difference in the concept that I'm trying to say. It's really just a difference in imagery. Even though this one was a last minute add, the reason it works is because of the colors, the texture, and then the fact that it's on some kind of like aqua clay panel board. So the texture and the movement of the watercolor, and because of course it's a hand, it works in the collection still. And it still works with the overall concept of my 2026 art collection. This collection is a reflection of what I've had to go through recently in the past couple years. I was doing a lot of inner wrestling on these larger than life concepts like time, death, purpose. And this 2026 art collection is a reflection of all of that. Of course, I would love to get into more of the details of the inspiration behind these paintings and maybe even the stories of what was going on in my life at the time. If you are interested in those stories, then please subscribe to my Substack. I am launching that currently and putting a few writings together that's going to talk more in detail about the paintings and then some life stories that go along with those. Okay, friends, until next time, thanks for joining me, and I can't wait to share a few more paintings of my 2026 art collection.
Thank you for watching.